Okay, so I just drew up a progression with all three of these models over the course of a couple weeks. In hindsight, I probably should have given each one of them their own time on the whiteboard, but I'm just going to zoom in when I talk about each one. So we have here a double progression, a dynamic double progression, and the rep goal system. So first, let's talk about the double progression. So with all of these, you're going to first pick a set and a rep scheme to abide by. Here I wrote that we're going to do 8 to 12 reps, and we're doing it for 3 sets, as you can see. So on week 1, we pick a weight, 50 pounds, and for our 3 sets, that lands us at 12 reps. We get a little less in the second set, but it's still good, 10 reps. And we barely make it in the rep range at the end with 8 reps. Our goal next week is to focus on progressing those last 2 sets, because with the double progression, we're going to focus on getting all 3 sets to the top end of our rep range before we move up. So since we already hit the top of the rep range on that 3rd set on week 1, we're not going to worry about progressing it on week 2. We're going to leave that alone. So we go for 11 and 9 on week 2. On week 3, all right, we successfully hit the top end of the rep range in our first 2 sets. So now we just have this last set to focus on. Week 4, since we didn't have to focus on progressing these first 2 sets, we were able to bump up an extra 2 reps in that last set. And since we successfully hit the top end of the rep range on all 3 sets, we now are leveling up to the 55s, and we notice that that cost us a few reps in our last 2 sets, but we just start the process over and continue to build up reps in that rep range until we can then level up and weight again. The next one is the dynamic double progression. Same deal here. You're going to pick a rep range for the exercise that you're going to stick within. And the way this works is it follows the same principle of double progression, where you're going to build up reps in a given rep range before you allow yourself to move up in weight. The difference with this one is you're going to treat each set as its own entity. So what that means is if any given set hits the top end of the rep range, you are now allowed to level up weight on that given set. But the other sets that haven't still hit the top end of the rep range are going to continue to work at that given weight and build up reps. So let's see what that looks like. On week 1, we're doing 3 sets of 300 pounds. We got 8 reps on our first set, 7 on the second, and 5 on the last. Since our rep range for this dynamic double progression is a 5 to 8, we are allowed to move up in weight on that first set. But these last 2 sets that didn't hit 8 yet, we're going to keep them at 300. And you see that's exactly what we did in week 2. We went to 310 pounds on that first set, and we just stuck to 5 reps on that. We leveled up in weight, and perhaps it was true that we could have gotten 6 or even 7 reps on that first set, but it's also completely viable to go for a weight jump and be a bit conservative with your reps so that you can, in a sense, deload that first set while you continue to progress in volume on the last 2 sets. So we got the 1x5 with 310, and on the last 2 sets we got 8 and 6, and we're still working with 300 obviously, but since we hit the top end of the rep range on that second set, on this 3rd week, you see that we moved it to 310. So now we have 2 sets with 310 and 1 with 300, and we're still progressing in reps on all of them. We went for a set of 6, a set of 5 with 310, and then we bumped down the weight back to 300. I can't tell if you can see all that or not. There we go. And we got 7 reps with that. Week 4, we are still progressing our first 2 sets of 310, and we have finally hit the top end of the rep range with 300, so we can level up that 3rd set to 310 with the other ones. And we just repeat the process. We've got a 3x8, 7 and 5 here with 310. You know the drill. If I would have wrote a week 6, it would have been a 1 set of 5 with 320, and then 2 sets of 8 and 6 with 310. That's dynamic double progression. Finally, we have the rep goal system. This one is a bit more, I'm less prone to recommend this to people because it requires a bit more math on your part. Not that I don't trust people, but you don't want to make your training log and programming any harder than you have to. It could be easy to fudge this one up a little bit, but essentially you're going to pick a total rep count that you're going to hit across a given amount of sets. And the reason I'm saying that you can fudge this up if you're not careful is you want to pick a total rep count that makes sense for the amount of sets that you're going to be hitting it for. And that's also just exercise dependent. So for this example, I chose 30 total reps for 2 sets. And you'll see that on week 1, I got 11 to 9 reps. And I continue just building up those 2 sets until on week 6, if you add up the rep count across those 2 sets, I hit 30 total reps. And in that case, I'm now allowed to level up to 90 pounds, and you see that that made me drop reps again. Now, the reason you want to be careful with how you pick your rep range on this is because, or actually, let me rephrase that. You'll see that with the rep goal system, what happens is when you start out, you could end up in something like the 8 to 12 rep range. And by the time you get to the end of that weight, you're actually in something that's more like the 15 to 20 rep range. You know, you have 17 to 13. That's a different rep range than what you started with. And that's one of the quirks of the rep goal system. It lets you focus even more than these other 2 progression models on just building up reps. And you don't have to focus so much on staying within a certain rep range and just getting more and more reps week after week. So that's the 3 progression models. Now, I'm going to lay out the instances where you would want to use each one and what it really depends upon when it comes to picking these progression models. So to talk about how I would use these progression models within a day of training, I drew up a full body session that is pull focused. And to talk about how I use these progression models, we'll first talk about how the session is structured. So the way I like to break up full body days, the way that I do them, is I have a strength portion of each session, I have a bodybuilding portion of each session, and then I have a floater portion of each session. Now, the strength portion is the compound movements that you open the session with. You open sessions with compounds because that's when you're the freshest for them. And you'll follow that up with isolations and potentially other compound movements where you want to touch up on certain things. You know, this is where I threw my arms and my lat isolation and my shoulder isolation. And then you have floater exercises. These are things that you can beat the hell out of frequently and continue to grow because they recover that quick. This is where you put stuff like your calves, forearms, your neck, and your abs, which is all things that I like to work on frequently right now. So, for the strength portion, I use 2 progression models. I use dynamic double progression and double progression. Why is that? Well, it's because of the exercises and the rep ranges I picked, which is something that makes sense for compound movements. So for the weighted pull-up, I chose the 5 to 8 rep range. Weighted pull-ups have a ton of potential for loading. There's guys that are doing 250, 300 pounds in this exercise. You have a much, how do I want to say this? In terms of levers to pull in training, that being weight and reps, you can pull the weight lever on your weighted pull-up much more consistently than you can with your lateral raise. You don't see a lot of guys lateral raising 300 pounds. And by that, I mean pretty much no one but Ken Cooper. But you do see guys doing pull-ups with 300 pounds. So it makes sense to have something like a dynamic double progression model on something that has such a high loading potential. Because if you think ahead, or if you have a training log, you can even look back and see that on things like compound movements, you're able to add weight to those very consistently. Whereas things like the isolation stuff, you're going to have to be driving progress forward by really mastering that one weight before you allow yourself to move up in weight at all. But with these compound movements, you can drive progress forward by adding weight on individual sets and focusing on them like that. So I got a dynamic double progression for the weighted pull-up, the RDLs, and I wrote up a double progression for the barbell rows because that's a movement that could be cheated real easily. So I would want to focus on rep quality and building up reps on that movement in particular instead of using a dynamic double progression, because I just know realistically progress will go better if I focus on building up quality reps instead of trying to add 5 pounds super consistently. So for the bodybuilding portion, I stuck with a double progression on all these movements. That's because these are all isolations. You shouldn't expect to add tons of weight to your isolation movements quickly. Over the course of your lifting journey, yeah, you will obviously. You're going to have to add weight to get bigger and stronger. But over the course of a month, 2 months, 6 months, You're not going to be adding a ton of weight to your lateral raise, your dumbbell pullover, your hammer curls, or your incline curls. So you're going to be driving progress by building up tons of reps and really mastering the weight before you level up. Now, that brings us to our floaters category. Now, the reason I call these floaters is because these are things that you can kind of do anywhere in your training session, and it's not going to impact anything else. Got a damn gnat right here in front of my eyes. So, these floaters, for example, you could take the calf raises here. You could superset that with your pull-ups, and it's not going to affect anything else. Same with the neck. Maybe not the forearms. Maybe save that for when you're doing your RDLs and barbell rows. If you're using straps, if you're not using straps, obviously don't do that. And your GHD sit-ups, you could maybe superset with the pull-ups too, or you throw it in with the bodybuilding stuff. Or you could do it all as a giant set at the end of your session and just do one set of each, go through again and again and again. But these are exercises where even more so than some of this isolation stuff, because these are such small muscles involved, other than the GHD sit-ups, working the abs, you're really going to be working on just building up reps and beating the books. You're going to be focusing on doing more work and more work each week. And that's really how you're going to drive progress. It's not really that getting to a 300-pound calf raise is what's going to get you big calves. It's the fact that you did 60 reps of it 4 times a week for the past 5 years and continue to progress in reps. That's what's going to get you big calves. So I guess to close my thoughts on this video, when it comes to picking progression models, you need to look at your intention with that exercise in the program and where it takes place in the program. In addition to that, you need to look at what kind of exercise you have and think to yourself, how will I be making progress on this exercise? Just to bring up these examples again. With something like your RDL, yeah, you're going to be adding a lot of weight to that to drive progress forward. You're not really going to be taking your RDL from 5 rep sets to 20 rep sets. That'd be impossible, because whenever you picked that weight for your 5 rep set, that had to be a few reps close to failure. How are you going to add 15 reps to that over the course of the next few months? I mean, you're not going to, unless you're taking the juice. But with something like your calf raises, it's entirely possible that you picked 50 pounds for your calf raises and you went from doing 25 reps with that in week 1 to getting to that 60 rep mark in like week 5 or 6. That is over double the reps, and that's just dependent upon the exercise and your loading with the exercise. So that's all for this video, guys. I think next I'm going to talk about maybe building a training split, like just building training sessions and how you want to go about doing that. I don't know. You guys let me know what you want next. I have a couple ideas in mind, but until then, y'all have a good one. What's going on, guys? I hope y'all having a good one. So this is going to be the last video I make for now on the Progressive Overload series, and so far in the series we have talked about Progressive Overload conceptually in 2 ways. The first one being we're trying to get from point A to point B by chasing the attributes of point B, and that really defines what our program is going to look like, because we're essentially laying out, okay, what is our goal? And that goal is our point B, and to get to the point B we're going to consistently and incrementally tackle on challenges that are similar to what point B would look like, which for people that are into lifting weights, that obviously looks like adding more weight to the bar, or a bit of a spoiler alert for the rest of the video, but I'm already rambling, by doing more work with a given weight. You know, a guy with bigger calves can calf raise more reps with the same weights. Bigger arms can curl the same weight for more reps, etc., etc. We also explained it in a manner where we are eventually going to get used to the same stimulus, because getting bigger, stronger is just adaptations. So what we need to do is incrementally increase the stress from training so that we continue to get more stimulus from that stress and continue to make adaptations and keep going on and on. And then in the last video, I showed you what a basic linear progression looks like And the three instances that I have found it useful if you're just a general trainee, which is whenever you are new to the gym, when you are rehabbing back to a baseline, and that's because you're at a deficit from what you were at previously, so you can expect to return there quickly. Or if you go out of your way to make linear progression work in your program. The example I showed in that video was starting from a high rep scheme down to a low rep scheme. That's also known as block periodization in traditional powerlifting spheres. But today we're going to talk about progression models that I think are more apt for the vast majority of people that are into lifting weights, regardless of what the goal is. And I even think that if you're into strength sports, you should spend time working with the progression models that I will cover today, because the issue that I spoke with, if I remember correctly, briefly on linear progression is that it is a quick progression model. There's a theoretical 1 rep max you can lift on a lot of things. With big compound movements, you're more likely to know that 1 rep max, but with things like the lateral raise, calf raises, ab work, you're less likely to know it. But there's still this idea that you're going to choose a weight for any of those exercises that is a certain percentage of your 1 rep max. And to only use a progression model based on adding weight as a means of progressing, you are moving quickly towards your theoretical 1 rep max. And it's not hard to imagine how that's very unsustainable. And that's because, so to think of intensity like this, any intensity is only a relevant challenge if it's done for a certain amount of reps. Okay, you have to make a training stimulus hard to get an adaptation out of it, or at least hard enough in a general sense. So most sets need to take place between 5 to 30 reps for you to get an adequate stimulus out of it, and that set needs to be taken close to failure. Well, if we are doing a set of 8 close to failure, I imagine that's like, I don't know, somewhere around 80, 85%. If we are adding just 5 pounds to that each week, we're going to get pretty close to something in the 90% range, and even close to 100% really soon, and it's not a sustainable model. That's what something like on this side of my whiteboard looks like, where with each week we are just adding weight, and it's going to work for 3 or 4 weeks, but you're going to notice that your performance is starting to decline. A lot of guys, to make this adding weight progression model work, if they're not following an intelligent strength training program, they're going to let other things be sacrificed in the name of adding weight, and that's usually rep quality. It's usually the stimulus of the set. They might increase rest times, things like that also matter, but it's not weight on the bar, and it doesn't impress their gym crush, so they're not really thinking about that as much. And with time, you're going to see that you'll plateau just adding weight. Trust me, I plateaued just trying to add weight when I wasn't following intelligent programming. And eventually, you're going to regress a little bit and plateau completely. Versus a progression model where we hang out at a given weight for a couple weeks, and we're doing some more work there, but it's not shown if you just are looking at weight as the only metric that matters. And you see that this is a model that can continue to go and go, because you are tackling on tougher training in a way that doesn't involve just weight on the bar. And I much prefer, whenever I am turning someone onto the gym, that was a weird way to say that. When I'm getting someone in lifting weights, I don't even bother telling them about linear progression unless they're interested in strength training. And even then, I might have them start out with something that looks closer to this, because this is a lot more realistic of what most of your time in the gym is going to have to look like. You can think of this as base building, and the reason I say that is because the way we are progressing with time on this side of the whiteboard is by doing more work with a given weight before we move on to the next weight class, so to speak. And you can think of this in a couple of ways, such as owning the weight and mastering the weight. And intuitively, it'll make sense if you stop and think about this for a little bit. If you take a weight that was pretty challenging for 5 reps, and you spend about a month, 2 months to get that 3 sets of 5 up to 3 sets of 8, it would make sense to me, and I think you would agree, that you could then add 5 to 10 pounds for your next 3 set of 5 session, and it's going to be about as challenging as it was last time around. And you'll be able to take that new weight that you just leveled up to and continue to do more work with it until you repeat the process. And we're just manipulating variables, or sorry, we're just manipulating reps now. That's the new variable. And the 3 progression models I like to use that follow this progression are double progression, dynamic double progression, and the rep goal system. And I'm going to now erase the whiteboard, and I'm going to show you what each one of those looks like after like a month or so. And I'm going to talk about when the best time to use each one of those in your program is.